Okay, could you tell me something about yourself, your name and background?
My name is Brooklyn-Lear Norman. My ethnic background, both my parents are African American, but my dad is also half white.
Mm-hmm.
I have Creole. My grandfather's Creole as well, and my grandmother's Italian.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
So,
Okay, and where did you grow up? Where are you from?
So I grew up in Michigan
Mm-hmm.
up until I was 13, and then I moved to Chicago, and I spent the rest there.
Oh, okay. And how was it like growing up in Michigan and Chicago?
So in Michigan, I lived in a small town, so that was like everyone knew each other. It was kind of like one big community.
Uh-huh.
Chicago, I actually lived in the city, so it was a bit of an adjustment. I
Uh-huh.
had to get used to like public transportation.
Uh-huh.
I know my neighbors, like the people who live in my building,
Uh-huh.
but like our whole neighborhood doesn't really know each other because there's just too many of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoy the city a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but Michigan just has a more homey feel to it, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you like the country as well?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, that's interesting. And did you have difficulties transitioning from the countryside to the city when you were, how old were you when you?
I was 13.
You were 13?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had difficulties, like, one, just learning the city because it was really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when you're in the countryside, it's kind of like you're safe. You know everyone around you. In
Yeah.
the city, you kind of have to be more aware of your surroundings. And it took
Mhm.
me a long time to get used to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think living in the city helped me a lot with my sense of direction.
Oh, okay.
Because, like, I got lost a lot trying to find my way around the city. So.
Uh-huh. Is it a nice place to walk around to? Like
Yeah, for sure. It's really
Yeah.
nice to walk around, especially in the downtown area, which is where I went to high school. My high school is like located downtown,
Mm-hmm.
so I would have to take like the train or the bus to get to school.
Oh,
And then
okay.
when I was down there, there's places to eat for lunch and places to walk after school, that kind of thing.
And like how about the diversity in Chicago? It's probably very
Yeah,
diverse.
the diversity in Chicago is very, very diverse, but
Mhm.
everyone lives amongst their own race and like socioeconomic class.
Oh, that's
So it's
interesting.
very, very segregated. And like even the suburbs in Illinois, you'll have like an upper class white suburb, a middle class white suburb, a middle class black suburb, a middle class Hispanic suburb. So it's very segregated there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And that's interesting about like America in general.
Yeah.
What do you think about that in general? Like why do you think that happens and how do you think that affects like American identity in some sense?
Well, in Chicago specifically, it definitely had a lot to do with like redlining and pushing certain races into certain communities and trying to get them out of communities. But I think in America, it kind of like, also in Chicago, I think it, not having to grow up in like a diverse neighborhood, make people a little bit more racist there.
Of course.
Yeah, I feel like because they didn't have to deal with people coming from different backgrounds or identities growing up a lot, it was like they didn't know how to interact with them and they had a lot of biases that they were unaware of.
And do you think that those are tied to economics sometimes as well?
Yes, it definitely can be. I think, when you're privileged and you grow up in a certain environment, you don't really know what someone else has had to go through. And so
No.
when hearing about that, you're like, you can't understand it. And so it's hard for them for the first time to see it and be like, oh, okay, like that's different from my situation.
Right. And how do you feel like America's handling diversity? I mean, like, I know that's such a big, like, broad question, but on the other hand, I think it is an important question, right?
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I think America tries to present itself as very diverse and, we want to accept everyone, the land of the free, that kind of thing. But in reality, we're, like, trying to get stricter laws on when it comes to immigration and things like that.
Right.
And we're not actually...
and that's contradictory, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very contradictory. We're sort of hypocrites in a way.
Yeah,
we say
that's
one
what I feel
thing
like,
and then we do another. So.
That's what I feel like too as well. Yeah, and it's like it was really weird. Like when my wife and I were coming back from Serbia, and then we there was like when you go through the customs, then there's like this commercial going about the U.S. citizenship and like how attractive it is and how wonderful it is and how open America is. And I was just thinking, geez, like, I mean, we've been bombarded with like news about how dangerous immigrants are in the news, and then yet they're trying to portray this other image of America at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think it is like a kind of identity crisis. Do you think America is going through an identity crisis?
I think so. I think we just aren't really sure who we want to be, or there's like a lot of opinions in America. They clash a lot of the time. So like you have one side who might be really extreme. Oh no, close everything off, and the other side is like, oh no, like we should be open. We should be the land of free. We have a lot of resources. Why not share them? You know, and make them available to others.
Or give other people the opportunity to achieve the American dream.
Yeah.
If they're going to work towards it, if they're going to work hard for it, not necessarily like people who are going to come into the country and, you know, abuse it or whatever. But it seems like they've turned it into like an either or situation, whereas it's really not. It's more complex. Do you feel like growing up biracially? Do you think like how has that influenced the way you see the world?
I feel like I did grow up biracial, but at least my mom, she was always like, to most people, like, you have brown skin. They're gonna view you as a person of color. And so it took me a long time to like really identify with my white side. I also don't like see a lot of my white family members that much because my grandma, she married my grandfather who is black, and she doesn't really talk to her family that much. So
and your white side is on my father's side.
Yeah.
And your father is white, or
he's half white, half black.
Half white, half black. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't really get to see that or be a part of that side of my race. So I felt like I was mostly growing up black. My mom is just black, and so that's kind of how she raised me. She raised me in that culture.
So you don't really completely see yourself as kind of biracial, but more
even though
as black. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So that is interesting. Like, do you feel like within the black community there's sometimes discrimination as well, like against someone who is partially has some white background or not?
Yeah, I think there can be. I think sometimes in the black community we're like, oh, pick a side, and we don't really want biracial people to choose. Oh, they're like, oh, just identify with your black side or just identify with your white side. But you have two different parts of you, and I think that can be challenging to like navigate it, obviously.
Because you are mixed.
Yeah, you are mixed,
It's a reality, right?
It is. So. It's like your reality, and so it can be hard for people to understand. I also think there's a lot of colorism in the black community, and that is kind of what it stems from. Typically, if you are mixed, you do have lighter skin, and you can be favored, and that can be really hard for other people who have darker skin to see, and especially like if they have the same, you know, academics as you, they're just as qualified and they're not getting those same opportunities. It can be really hard for them to, you know, deal with. So I think it's.
Do you think that's like a reflection of because of the kind of racism that already exists, or the kind of privileges that already exist? Then it's kind of internalized also within that African American community.
It's definitely a like internalized racism that like has been taught to us, so that we've almost been like a little bit like brainwashed to believe in a way. And so I think like it comes
and that's
from,
kind of problematic in a way as well,
it is.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So do you feel like will there ever be a point when America starts to change a little? Or, I mean, a lot of people have hope in your generation as like trying to, or even younger generations trying to change things to make our society more diverse, so we're more accepting of diversity, let's put it that way, probably, because it is pretty much a diverse society, but then you have like communities that are very segregated too as well. So, I mean, it's like, do you think that trend's going to continue, or do you think that it's your generation is going to break out of that, or do you feel like old habits die hard? Or I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of both for me. I do see like that changing in a way because my generation has like started to break out of it, but you're always going to have people who believe what they believe, and because of freedom of speech and we can have our own beliefs,
Right.
it's going to be put out there. We're going to have contradicting opinions. We're going to have people on two different sides of it. And so I think it's kind of hard to like for everyone to go in one direction when we have so many like
That's a good
conflicting
point.
opinions, and like it's hard for people to agree, and a lot of people don't want to like find a compromise or like a happy medium.
So do you feel like that is a big like identity crisis in America? I mean, we have to be like, I guess, democratic and divided in a lot of ways, but and this is something I've been struggling with, do we have like is there a common ground anymore, or do you feel like the common ground is kind of just disappearing and there's just replaces like maybe the only common ground is making money and being to make a living or something, but otherwise there's like competition and
I feel like we're very caught up in the actual arguing and not like maybe what it is we're saying or like trying to come to some type of resolution. Sometimes I feel like people just want to, my side, no, listen to what I have to say.
Exactly.
Instead of like actually putting our heads together and thinking like, okay, this is what I think, this is what you think, let's come to some type of agreement.
And like more like long-term conversations as opposed to just short interactions. Yeah. How do you feel like, so why did you choose to come to Hampton University, and then like how has that been like just coming here?
So for me, when I was applying to colleges, it was always very like talked about between me and my mom that I would have to go to where it gave me the most money, and I was lucky enough to be one of the university scholars this year, so everything is like fully paid for me, so this was just good. Like, you know, this is a good place to be in, especially if I would like to go to medical school and stuff, and so, you know, just less debt. So then I came to visit the campus, and I walked around, and it's just a very homey feel, I think.
Yes, that's true. Some students are kind of like, if they're more coming from a very urban perspective, they feel a little out of place. Some people have mentioned that to me in their interviews. So, but you like the kind of homey feel here?
I do. So the people that I've met here so far, I think I've met a very like great group of people, and that has made it feel very homey as well. But also, just everyone that I've like come in contact with has been very welcoming and like kind to me. Obviously, we have like the Hampton runaround, and sometimes it's hard for me to like find the information that I need.
Of course,
but like overall, I do really enjoy the campus, and I think coming from like a predominantly white high school to here, it's like, I don't know, I just feel a little bit more at home here, a little bit more comfortable here.
So is this also a way you feel like it also gives you a way to connect with your roots?
Yeah, I definitely think it gives me a way to connect with my roots. Also just like, I feel like I have more like-minded individuals here. At my old school, we had a lot of issues with like racism and just like where the administration didn't really talk about it. Like, we had something that actually made the news last year. A student like came dressed in a Nazi costume for Halloween, and like he walked across the stage and like performed some type of march, and everyone was very like uncomfortable with it, and administration did nothing, and we held like a protest and everything. And so there was just like a lot of things at my school that was like they let slide under the rug because they wanted to keep our image very good, I guess. And so it was like here I feel like
do you think like liberal, I mean, I guess liberal America, or America in some sense, like with the multiculturalism, is this like somehow something is just not going well? The fact that like people are protesting and kind of supporting Nazism and things like that, like where is that coming from? Like, I mean, it existed before, right? It did, but it's now more open, or is it just what are your viewpoints there?
I think it still exists for sure, and I think people may just be a little bit more guarded and secreted about some of their ideals and their beliefs. For him specifically, he had spoken about, you know, his family and what his family believes in. So this was definitely something that was taught to him. And I think, like, at least in my opinion, racism and bigotry and that kind of thing is taught. I think it's something that, you know, if this is what you're taught as a child and this is what you see and this is how your family treats people, obviously you're going to pick up on those ideas and those beliefs, and you're going to add them into your own way of life. And so I think it can be sort of hard to break out from that. But I do think it's like our own responsibility to educate ourselves and to know, like, right from wrong, and like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be behaving in this way because this is insensitive to other people. This is racist. This is rude. I am discriminating towards someone.
Yeah. Do you feel like that our government is almost, or not our government, but I mean, I guess that there are certain people who are kind of protected because of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And it's been really surprising to me that, like, some of these people become, like, guest speakers at universities, and they're actually supporting, like, neo-Nazi viewpoints, and then the university spends a huge amount of money, I've read this in the news, protecting those individuals because they're afraid of the protesters. But how can we, I guess the issue is, again, like, also coexisting with this freedom of speech, freedom of hate speech, like, and the consequences that has on communities. Do you think that there should be more protection of people who are the object of hate speech?
I definitely think there should be more protection for victims. I think, like, freedom of speech, people, obviously I believe we should be able to say what we want, but I do think there is a line. Like, when it does come to hate speech, I think you're crossing the line, because then I feel like you're kind of stepping over into someone else's freedoms, like their freedom to be who they are, and to, you know, they were born that way. It's not something that they can control.
Exactly. So that's a good point.
I do think that when it comes to hate speech specifically, I don't know how freely we should be able to spew out hate.
Right, because there are consequences.
Yeah, there are consequences for that.
People's lives could be lost from that. Do you feel like that's kind of like a, I guess, a crisis, like a constitutional crisis in American society? Like, how did you feel about January 6th? I mean, like, what happened with January 6th and the insurrection and things like that? Like, you didn't follow that much?
No, I did not.
Oh, you didn't? Like, people storming the Capitol?
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah. Okay. I thought that, I don't know, I couldn't believe that people even thought that was okay. Or, like, that they even made it that far, honestly. I feel like at least for me, like, the Capitol building, I would assume that it's very protected. And so, like, how did you even get all the way, and how were you able to bear arms there? You know what I mean?
Exactly. So do you feel like punishing those individuals, and then yet also, like, some people on the far right are saying it's like that's freedom of speech, what they did, so, you know, right to protest and everything? Do you feel like
protesting should be more, like, peaceful? When I think of, like, your freedom to protest, it's peaceful. You're just, like, standing up for what you believe in. No one's getting hurt. No one's being harmed. You know, you're not causing any harm to anyone. You're just, like, saying what you believe in and trying to spread, like, awareness for that. That, for me, felt like a riot.
Yeah. And do you feel like this country has, like, I mean, where is it headed now, like, with the elections coming and, like, all the confusion and all the different voices? How do you feel like it's, like, where is it going, do you think?
I feel like everyone is just starting to be a lot more confused. I feel like around, like, the election and what happened on January 6th, there's a lot of, like, conspiracy around it, and I feel like it's getting in to a lot of people's heads, and no one really knows, like, what to believe, and everyone, you know, so I think everyone's just a little bit confused about where they stand right now. I think it'll be interesting to see how the upcoming candidates portray themselves and how they decide to sell themselves to us.
Do you feel like there's enough there's enough diversity in in our government. Like,
no, absolutely not. No,
mm-hmm.
I feel like our government is made up of a lot of white men,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's kind of what it was like built upon, like white men being in those kind of powerful positions and those kind of powerful seats, and we still see that a lot today.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's been very hard for us to, break through there. So.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that we will come to a point where people will start breaking through there?
I mean, yeah, we already have had like a few, Barack Obama, for instance, or even Kamala Harris, who was just here.
Right. Did you listen to her?
I was there, yes.
So what did you think? I mean, were you impressed or were you
slightly?
I
it was late. It did start late, which I was like, okay, that's kind of sucky. But I was impressed. I think it was just a great opportunity to hear her speak, and I think where she has gotten herself, obviously, she can be seen as a good role model for especially a lot of students here. And so I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like she is ready to become president? Because obviously she's one step away from becoming president of the United States, like the first woman, or the first, and she is mixed background, right? It was the Indian and African American. And so she would bring a lot of diversity.
She would.
Yeah. Do you think that it's possible that Biden would step down at a certain point because of his age, or do you think he's just going to cling to power?
I don't know. I do think that he should step down because of his age. I do think that at a certain point, the presidency would be too much. The older you're getting, you do kind of want to settle down a little bit. So I don't know if I can see him trying to go for another term, but I definitely can see her trying to become president. I think that would be pretty powerful, actually.
Yeah, that would be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And but do you feel like there's a lot? I've seen a lot of, or I've heard a lot of resistance to Kamala Harris within the Black community. Specifically amongst my students, sometimes voicing things about her past as a prosecutor, and that maybe in a certain sense, she was too harsh, I guess, sometimes towards people with I guess it was maybe drug offenses or different things. So have you looked into those issues at all, or do you think we should think that there's some space for her to grow, or is she
I think it's definitely something that should be considered for sure when deciding if that's the person you would like to vote for and you would like to be in office. But I do think there's room to grow. I think obviously there are some offenses, right, like small drug offenses and harsher sentences I don't agree with, and so that would obviously be something that would deter me from her, but also I feel like I'm never going to agree with everything that one candidate has done or that one candidate does. And so it's more so
a practical decision as well.
Who I agree with the most. I'm never you're never going to agree with everyone on anything about everything. So
what do you think America should represent on the global stage? Do you feel like we should be defending democracies, or do you think that we should retreat? Some students are talking about that, or how should we handle all of these issues, and are we too focused on the military? I think sometimes but on the other hand, we have all these global problems. That seems like a mess to me. I mean, also for myself, having lived in China and kind of seen, I was there for 8 years, and just seeing the military build up it's just huge military build-up preparing for war, and you can see that also even happening with Russia as well. And it's there are these huge militaries building up for war, and then you have these places on the edges of these countries that they want to make part of their own, but in an illegal way, without even giving those people any chance. But and of course America is kind of we're one of the only superpowers behind supporting those countries. If we if we retreat, I guess it would be like, then obviously those places would be taken over. But then what would be the consequence later? It just seems like a very complicated issue. And then we would hope that like those, like Russia or China, for example, would focus on peace. But it seems like our world it's sometimes not headed to that. It's kind of inexplicable in some ways, but it does go back to a lot of things with the past. What do you think about that? Like how?
I think when it comes to like global issues, we have our hands in a lot, and I definitely think that we shouldn't be pulling away from those like smaller countries, because they do have their own identity and they don't have the means to support themselves in this moment. And you know, they deserve the chance, and they deserve to identify how they identify. And if they don't want to necessarily join another country and they want to stay their own, they should be able to. They shouldn't be forced into, you know, oh, you have to join us. Now you guys are part of Russia. Like, that's not fair to them.
So you think that like maybe what Biden and Harris have done, I guess put her under him as well. So like they like by giving Ukraine some weapons like so they can fight for themselves. Do you think that's the best solution at this point, or do you feel like it's so complicated? Because like I mean, obviously, if it becomes worse in the future, like we may have to make certain decisions. But then like would we, you know, be willing to have? I mean, like we don't want to get involved in a war, you know. I mean, so I think it becomes also like we also are concerned about getting caught in a bigger war and our younger generation getting hurt by it. And I think it seems like it's a very difficult situation. I think it's not so simple as like Trump said, like you would just get Zelensky and Putin in the same room and then get Zelensky to give up some of his land for Russia. Yeah. But I feel like that's not even our place to tell them to give up their own freedom for Russia that's coming in. And then we've been hacked by Russia, we've been hacked by China, satellite came over us and everything. I mean, which kind of sends a message to us in a certain sense, but I mean, it's such a complicated issue because they're superpowers as well, so.
I feel like we can only get involved to an extent, because obviously we do also have to put America first as well. Right. And, you know, make sure that we remain safe. And it isn't really our place to, you know, mitigate that conversation. Like that isn't really our job. Obviously we want to help and we want there to be more peace in the entire world. And so, you know, we can help smaller countries like Ukraine, but only to an extent, because we don't want to...
Right, especially with Ukraine, because it's really not part of NATO. But what if, like, NATO's attacked, then do you think we should be... Obviously, we have historic kind of, like, I don't know, like, treaties and things like that, but do you feel like we should pull out of those, or should we stay with them, or should we ask Europe to do more for themselves? Like, it's always like a very complicated issue.
Yeah, I really don't know. I think.
Yeah, and then Asia is like that too, like Taiwan, of course. Yeah. They're saying, oh well, we have to. I was kind of like, I think it's kind of ironic. Like I talked to some people in the military. They'll be like, oh, we have to defend Taiwan, but it's like. Why do we have to defend Taiwan, but we don't have to defend Ukraine when they're going through something? It's just like, why did they make that, you know? Yeah,
how do we choose?
How do we choose, like, which one is better to, like, and it's kind of ironic. And then, like, okay, well, we give them money to help them, but it's like, is that giving them kind of like a false hope? Because, I mean, Russia is a huge superpower. It's a giant country, and
they have a pretty big advantage for sure.
Yeah, and then in Europe, it doesn't seem to be ready for whatever, if something does happen. Yeah. I don't think Europe is ready. I don't think the U.S. is ready for that. And then I don't think it's kind of a big irony that, like, wars, like, why would people in other countries want to go to war so much? be mobilized. In some sense, they're not free to make the decision.
Yeah.
But here, like in the United States, I think we wouldn't want to give up our freedom just to live and not to go to war. Not because we went through Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that. And so, yeah. What about like going back to let's go back to your experience at the White High School. Like, how was that? Like, you were in Chicago at the time. I was in Chicago at the time. Yeah, and so could you talk more about that experience?
Yeah. So I feel like I spent my 8th grade year in Chicago, and I went to a predominantly black school.
Mm-hmm.
That just for that 1 year was like a K through 8 school. I just finished up middle school.
And how was that?
That was great. I felt really at home there. But what I will say is the schools in Chicago that are like primarily black or any person of color, schools that mostly people of color go to, they have a lot less resources. The school that I went to in 8th grade, we didn't have a library. So like going from that school to a school like my high school, Chicago has a like high school setup called selective enrollment, and there's like 8 schools in your 8th grade year. They take your grades from 7th grade, and that's like worth a certain amount of points depending on what grades you got. They take your standardized NWA test scores, and then you also take another test called the selective enrollment test, and you get like it's 900 points total, and you get a certain score in each category, and then whatever score you get, you can apply to certain schools, and you make a list, and so the first one that you meet like their score criteria on your list, that's where you go. And so the school that I went to was first on my list just because it was a great school academically, and that's kind of where my mom wanted me to be. But going there from like in 8th grade being at a predominantly black school with like not that many resources, that was a bit of adjustment. Not necessarily for me, because when I lived in a small town, it was a small white town, so I did like my school was great, it had a lot of great resources, so I was able to kind of use some of those things from that school. But like I went there with one other friend who got into that school with me, and he really did struggle, going from like what we were learning at our elementary school to what we were learning in high school. And so I do feel like that's a big adjustment, and they don't really prepare you for that. A lot of the white children went to private schools or other like the best schools in the city and Chicago public schools, so they really didn't have many issues like adjusting to that course load. But some people did, and I do think that wasn't really taken into account that well. Also, we just had a lot of like things being swept under the rug, I feel, for like our image. My school had like its own boosters club called like the Friends of Jones, and it was just a bunch of people's parents who would like give us thousands of dollars every year. So like half of our staff in the school their salary was being paid by our boosters club. And so like we had a lot more people in our school working to help us with different resources than a school in my neighborhood where I live that's mostly black students. So I do think that gave me a bit of like an advantage, but it's also, I would say, it's unfair because a lot of those schools don't have like
the resources.
Yeah, they don't have that. They don't have like parents who can just pay for a teacher $60,000 salary and like like it's nothing for them. And so I think that like the way that their public schools education system is kind of set up, not everyone is getting the same education at all the schools. Like it's not very standardized. It's not the same all around.
So that's definitely something that should be resolved in our country. Is 100%. Like, and do you feel like obviously private like schools are not the answer completely because not everybody can afford them.
Yeah.
Do you think that public like failures of public education in a certain sense are kind of lead people to believe in like conspiracy theories and other things, like it's an issue with the educational system to a certain extent, or do you feel like it's just because we also don't know that much?
I feel like it may be a little bit of that, but I feel like it's more so that like we don't know a lot. I do feel like a lot of like there's a lot of like things that obviously we can know, like maybe in the government or things that we know, things that are just unknown. And sometimes I also think it's a little bit of boredom that people are just like, oh, this is interesting. True. Like, why can't it be this?
Oh, okay,
so
that
I
is
think
true.
Sometimes conspiracy theories have a lot to do with like people just being born and it's like, oh, this is an interesting story. Like, that would be cool if it was like this. So I'm just gonna believe that.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if it like doesn't necessarily make sense or like, you know.
That's a good point. Let me see what. Is there something else you would like to talk about?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
No.
No, I can't think of it.
What do you think? Okay, I'll ask you this question. What do you think like America will be like in 5 years?
I don't know. Hopefully better in some aspects. I feel like I don't see us like changing like so greatly, but I do think there'll be small improvements. I think for like the change that like America wants to see or that like my generation wants to see, it is going to take a large amount of time. It is going to be something that like my generation works on and then we pass on to our children and then they work on and they pass it on to their children and they work on and it's just going to slowly change the environment that we're in and we're going to slowly be working towards like these big goals that obviously are like really far in the future in my opinion, but it's going to take time. So in 5 years hopefully we'll be a little less racist, we'll be a little bit more accepting, we'll be, you know, a little bit more open-minded, but I don't think there's going to be like a drastic change.
Yeah. And you talked a lot about like segregation in a sense, like how segregation kind of exists, even though there's no segregation.
Yeah.
There aren't laws on the book creating segregation, but do you feel like that will change in the future? Do you think we could finally like kind of break through some of that? And break through some of the stereotypes, or do you think that it's just kind of like solidifying in America to some extent? Like,
I think specifically in Chicago, I don't necessarily know if I see that changing anytime soon, just because I feel like there's kind of the same thing happening, at least in my neighborhood currently. When we moved there, it was a predominantly black neighborhood. My neighborhood is being like severely gentrified currently. We actually have the Obama Library Foundation that's being built literally a block ahead of me. And I live right by the University of Chicago. So that is also like...
gentrifying everything.
Yeah, it's gentrifying everything there.
And what do you think about that gentrification? Like how...
I'm not a fan of it. It is pushing people out of their homes and their communities. For example, my senior year, the building that we lived in was owned by a guy in Paris, and he sold it to some company, and this company like basically put a note on everyone's door like, you guys have to move out in 60 days or whatever, and they basically turned our apartment building into dorm living for like students who want to have like an off-campus apartment that's not really off-campus because it's like right next door. So it's like dorm style living now, and it was kind of like, oh, well, like, what are we going to do? We have 60 days to find a whole new place. You guys barely even gave us a warning. It just didn't really seem fair, and it, like, has a lot to do with the university and, like, this company coming in. Obviously, oh, this is a great way to make money. These college students are here. Let's get them to pay us $1,000 to come live in this one room and find them 2 other roommates. And so it's like, you know.
Right, and that's happening all over in cities. And what do you think about inflation also? Do you think inflation has really had an impact on like your generation, inflation in the pandemic?
I would definitely say it has had an influence on my generation. I think a little bit my generation like doesn't totally understand the value of money because of inflation. I feel like the way things are priced now compared to the way things have been priced in the past. And obviously a lot of that is due to inflation, and because of that, our value of money is a lot different than I feel like my mom's value of money. And so,
definitely.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, like...
Even just like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the dollar was... it seemed like you could buy so much more with $1, but now it's like a dollar is worth about... It seems sometimes almost like half, or even like sometimes almost like a quarter of what it was. Do you think there's a limit to like inflation in our society? Like it keeps on going up. Like I heard that the Fed is gonna raise interest rates again, and it's just like it's already raised interest rates so many times. Like but people are still buying. I guess, the job market is kind of good in the sense that people are getting jobs, but their salaries aren't really going up,
Yeah.
and inflation is going up. Or do you think that is going to create more like class privileges and inequality, like economic inequalities in our society?
Inflation going up is going to create more privileges for certain classes, obviously. I think because those are the people who are going to be able to afford those certain luxuries still, whereas one family can no longer afford that luxury because it's worth so much more now, where 5 years ago they could.
Right, that's a good point. Yeah, so okay, so I think, do you have something else to say, or no?
No,
Okay, well, let's